The sun had barely risen over the peaceful cul-de-sac when Karen made her rounds, clipboard in hand, eyes squinting for violations and trespasses, real or imagined. She was the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood's homeowners association, even though the community was only loosely affiliated with one. Most residents tolerated her with polite nods and feigned interest in her flyers and bulletins, but nobody had ever dared confront her directly, until my wife moved in. We had just closed on our new home, a cozy 3-bedroom with a spacious yard tucked at the end of the street. My wife, Andrea, had fallen in love with the place the moment she saw the porch swing. It reminded her of her grandmother's house growing up. To her, it wasn't just a house, it was the start of something real. We were both excited to settle down, maybe start a family. But that excitement was short-lived. It started on our second day there, when Karen came striding up our driveway like she owned the pavement. Without even introducing herself, she launched into a speech about how things were done in her neighborhood. "You'll want to join the HOA immediately," she said, flipping open a binder. "We have dues, community maintenance fees, regulations for lawn care, garbage bins, and mailbox height. Everything you need for a respectable community." Andrea raised an eyebrow. "I thought this neighborhood didn't have a formal HOA." Karen blinked, momentarily thrown off. "It's not formal federal, no, but we maintain community standards. It's what keeps property values up. Voluntary, technically, but everyone joins. It's just what's expected." "Well," Andrea said calmly, "we won't be joining." Karen's smile faltered. "Excuse me." Andrea didn't flinch. "We read the deed. There's no legal requirement, no binding covenant. We're fine handling our own lawn and mailbox, thanks." Karen's face turned the color of underripe tomatoes, pale and blotchy. She stiffened, looked Andrea up and down as if she couldn't quite process what she was hearing. "People like you are exactly why we need structure. It only takes one nonconformist to ruin a community's image." Andrea folded her arms. "Then consider me your worst nightmare." Karen turned and stormed away, muttering something about setting a precedent. Over the next few days, things escalated. It began with anonymous notes on our doorstep, typed and unsigned, of course, complaining about the visual impact of our garbage cans being visible from the street for an extra hour after pickup. Then it was the too bright porch light that allegedly disturbed the nocturnal rhythms of nearby pets. And when Andrea planted sunflowers in the front yard, tall, vibrant, unapologetically golden, Karen appeared the next morning with a rolled-up pamphlet in hand titled A Guide to Subtle Landscaping for Harmonious Communities. Andrea wasn't amused. "I don't answer to a self-declared block captain," she said, ripping the pamphlet in half and tossing it in the recycle bin without a second glance. Karen, however, wasn't the kind of person who took rejection lightly. She doubled down. Took photos of our driveway at odd hours. Talked in hushed, conspicuous tones to other neighbors while glancing in our direction. One afternoon, we noticed a small drone hovering briefly above our backyard before darting away. Subtlety was not her strong suit. Then came the incident. It was a quiet Saturday morning. Andrea had just returned from a night shift, still wearing her duty boots and standard-issue sheriff's polo. She had been on call all night, responding to a domestic dispute out near the county line. Exhausted, she wanted nothing more than to shower and nap, but she noticed Karen standing just across the street, phone in hand, staring at our house with unsettling intensity. "Something's up," Andrea muttered as she stepped out of the truck. "She's been standing there for 10 minutes. As Andrea approached the door, a patrol car rounded the corner and pulled up to the curb. Lights weren't flashing, but the message was clear. Karen had called the police. 2 officers stepped out. One was new, fresh out of academy, visibly unsure of why he was even there. The other was Officer Glenn, older, seasoned, and already rolling his eyes. "Got a report of a disturbance," Glenn said, mostly as a formality. Karen came marching across the street like she'd been waiting to perform this scene her whole life. "Yes. I've been trying to enforce HOA standards, and this woman, she pointed at Andrea, has been confrontational, planting unapproved flora, ignoring noise ordinances, and refusing to maintain acceptable aesthetics. She has no respect for community rules and is becoming a public nuisance. Andrea tilted her head, bemused. You called the cops because of flowers. She also raised her voice. Karen added quickly. There are children on this street. Officer Glenn sighed. Ma'am, are you the homeowner? I am, Andrea replied. And this HOA you're referring to, he turned to Karen, is this legally binding? It's voluntary, Karen said tightly, but we have bylaws. Voluntary means not enforceable, Glenn said. We're not here to enforce landscaping preferences. Is there any actual disturbance or crime? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish struggling for air. She threatened the harmony of the neighborhood. That's when Andrea calmly pulled out her badge. Ma'am, she said to Karen, her voice even and firm, I am the sheriff. You just wasted department resources on a personal vendetta. The silence was nuclear. Karen blinked, confused. You're law enforcement. Andrea nodded. And just so we're clear, if you continue harassing us, spying on our property, or using false reports to summon law enforcement, you could be facing charges, starting with misuse of emergency services and escalating to stalking if you don't back off. Karen took a step back, visibly shaken. I was just trying to maintain order. Andrea cut in. That's my job. Yours is to stay off my lawn. Karen turned without another word and fled, back to her house. Officer Glenn tipped his cap to Andrea. Good luck in the neighborhood, he said with a smirk. Andrea smiled. Thanks, Glenn. Tell dispatch not to send anyone else out here unless she starts a cult. That afternoon, the drone never returned. The notes stopped. Karen became uncharacteristically quiet. Rumors began to circulate that she was looking to move to another neighborhood, one with a real HOA. As for us, we finally planted the rest of the sunflowers. They bloomed defiantly under the summer sun, unbothered, unapologetic, and absolutely beautiful. Karen stood on the curb, arms crossed, lips pursed, and phone clutched tightly in her manicured hand. Her voice was raised just enough for the surrounding neighbors to overhear as she launched into a practiced speech about community standards and property value preservation. My wife, Laura, stood calmly on our porch, her stance unflinching, eyebrows slightly raised in bemused disbelief. You're not following the neighborhood rules, Karen barked. Everyone who moves into this development is expected to join the HOA. It's not optional. Laura looked down at her clipboard and then back up, her voice even. Actually, Karen, we did our research. Our house was built before the HOA was established. The deed is clean, there's no legal requirement for us to join. Karen scoffed, glancing toward the street as if the force of her gaze alone could summon some neighborhood allies. That's not how we do things around here. If you won't respect the community, then I'll have no choice but to involve the authorities. I stepped forward from the doorway, coffee in hand. You're going to call the cops because we won't pay into your bake sale fund. Karen's eyes flared. This isn't a joke. There are bylaws, and standards, and which don't apply to us, Laura interrupted coolly. And honestly, Karen, if you're so confident in your authority, go ahead. Call them. The audacity of that challenge must have hit her pride like a hammer. She pulled out her phone, muttering something about law enforcement and handling people like this. I rolled my eyes and went back inside. Laura just leaned against the porch post, arms folded, watching. 15 minutes later, a patrol SUV turned the corner into our quiet cul-de-sac. Karen beamed like she'd summoned divine intervention, practically skipping toward the vehicle. The SUV rolled to a stop, lights off. The door opened, and out stepped Laura. In full uniform. Karen froze mid-step, her face contorting in a confused squint. What? Laura tucked her sunglasses into her front pocket, adjusted her utility belt, and walked over to the stunned woman. Ma'am, you called to report a civil issue. Laura asked professionally, voice clipped and cold. About someone refusing to join a voluntary homeowners association. Karen's face drained of color as she blinked rapidly, trying to understand what just happened. But, how are you? I'm the sheriff, Laura said plainly. Which you would have known had you spent less time spying over hedges and more time reading your welcome packet. It's in there. Page 2. Karen looked around, suddenly aware that neighbors were now peeking through blinds, standing on porches, pretending to water lawns while very obviously watching. She sputtered something unintelligible, then forced out a laugh. This is all just a misunderstanding, of course. I didn't realize. You didn't care, Laura corrected. You assumed authority where you had none. You threatened law enforcement over something you have no legal standing on. That's called filing a false report. And I strongly suggest you don't make that mistake again. Karen's eyes widened. You wouldn't charge me with. I could, Laura said flatly. But consider this a warning. One you won't get twice. With that, Laura turned and walked up the driveway, her boots echoing with slow confidence. Karen stood frozen for a moment, face blank, before huffing and stomping away like a child who just got told recess was cancelled. She didn't even glance back. Inside, I gave Laura a slow clap. That was art. She smirked. It's amazing how quickly self-righteousness evaporates when confronted with actual authority. Over the next week, we noticed a change in the neighborhood. The emails from the HOA stopped arriving in our inbox. The passive-aggressive flyers about non-compliant residents disappeared from our mailbox. Karen kept her distance, her smile brittle and brief whenever we crossed paths. It was clear her pride had been wounded deeply, and publicly. But the real shift came a few days later when a different neighbor, Mrs. Harrison from 2 doors down, approached us as we were unloading groceries. I just wanted to say, she said with a gentle smile, thank you. Karen's been running this wall like a little dictatorship for years. Most of us thought we had no choice but to go along with it. Seeing someone stand up to her like that, it was long overdue. Laura nodded. It's one thing to have community rules. It's another to try to strong-arm people into something they never agreed to. Soon, word began to spread. Other homeowners dug into their deeds and found that, like us, they weren't actually legally bound to the HOA. A small rebellion formed, quiet at first, but growing. Some stopped paying dues. Others refused to participate in Karen's meetings or ignored her barking about lawn lengths and mailbox paint colors. The board, Karen and 2 of her cronies, held an emergency meeting. We were invited, of course, but politely declined. Still, reports trickled in, Karen shouting about loss of control, accusing neighbors of undermining her. People stood up to her. The majority vote shifted. Karen lost her position as president. A new board formed, one that was genuinely voluntary and actually focused on improving things rather than policing them. Community cleanups, shared tool libraries, and barbecues replaced Karen's flyers and veiled threats. One evening, months later, as we enjoyed lemonade on our porch, Karen walked by. She looked different, tired, smaller somehow. She offered us a tight nod, but said nothing. We nodded back, silently. Some battles don't need to be revisited. Laura leaned back in her chair, letting out a satisfied sigh. Power is funny, she said. Some people think they can take it. But the real kind. That comes from knowing where you stand. I raised my glass. To standing your ground. She clinked hers against mine. And making sure the loudest person in the room isn't always the one in charge.